Teachers of Reddit, what was the best lateness excuse you ever heard? When I was in college, a kid showed up nearly an hour late to our final exam. His excuse, I was in jail until about 25 minutes ago. This sort of happened to me. Got released from house arrest and the parole board was f***ing with me and made me wait an hour and a half for a piss test while letting people who signed in 45 minutes later than me in for their meetings prior to me. I went to class an hour late and the teacher demanded my reasoning. I showed him all of my parole board paperwork and he immediately apologized and told me not to worry about it. And no, I'm not a dangerous felon. Got pinched for blowing up soda bottles. Just heard this one last week. I'm sorry I was late. I have diarrhea. Truth or lie, you have to respect bathroom problems. Not a teacher, but a kid in class walked in late to my English class in 8th grade. My teacher was really weird and would go on these rants about how space doesn't exist. Reality is a figment of our imagination, and one person at Google is taking over the world by deciding what the results Google gives you are. This kid walks in and says I'm not late because time doesn't exist. He wasn't marked late. A freshman girl with a junior brother was late. She said her brother was taking forever in the shower in the morning. I can't figure out why it takes him so long. He has short hair. What is he doing in there? He does this all the time. Office staff was cracking up when she left. I'm a teacher. This year I have a student who comes in halfway through first period literally every single day. I finally got on his case about why I try not to pry, but my god. And he finally admitted that he didn't like waking up to an alarm. So he doesn't. He just eventually wakes up and comes to school. Primary teacher here. Teaching 11-year-olds. Kid comes in 30 minutes late because he was waiting for his lead shoes to finish charging. Turns out he was not lying and proceed to moonwalk over to his chair with his shoes flashing. Couldn't even be mad, it was too cool/stupid at the same time. Had a classmate bring in her fender once. The professor just nodded and continued class without comment. One of my teachers told that a girl came in late and claimed there had been a bomb attack next door to her home and that the road was blocked. We live in Finland, so the story was an obvious lie, except it wasn't. There had been a bomb at the police station next to her home, the only of its kind in decades. I was a tar, running twice weekly lab sessions in the evening. Being more than 10 minutes late to a lab usually earned a 0 grade for the day, so you usually needed a medical note or police report to get out of it. At the end of class, one student who was 20 minutes late came up to me and apologized profusely. He was a quiet, unassuming Chinese guy with glasses and a below average grasp on the English language. He told me that, while he was walking to class, a guy in front of him was shot multiple times by a man in a nearby parked car, which then sped off. He claimed that he rushed over to the man and attempted to attend to his wounds along with another bystander, but that he died before the ambulances arrived. My first thought was, that's ridiculous. But then I noticed his shirt, jeans, and forearms covered in blood. Before I had a chance to really say anything, he beelines it to the exit and leaves. A couple hours later, out of curiosity, I googled Toronto shooting death and sure enough, there's a 14-minute-old article describing a fatal shooting that occurred earlier in the day, not terribly far from campus. The next day, I get an email from the course instructor informing me that the student had submitted a police report to confirm his involvement in the incident. Mothef held a man in his arms as he died and still made the effort to come to class. I can't even imagine what that guy was going through as he quietly sat in the back of that room. I would give a fellow student a ride to school every day in high school, and he was never awake when I pulled up to his house to pick him up. I felt bad that I was writing his name as my excuse for being late every day and didn't want to embarrass him. I eventually resorted to absurd excuses that the office and principal seemed to understand as code for it being this kid's fault. Most of my excuses were something along the lines of UFO attack, grandma got ran over by a reindeer, Bigfoot sighting, car was taken, and had to wait for Liam Neeson to bring it back. Whatever I thought was funny each morning. Kid had a tough home life and principal agreed if I could get him to school every day it was okay if I was late. Not me, but a teacher I knew. Had a high school freshman that was late because he forgot he had high school and went to his middle school. Kid actually sat in a class before realizing he was at the wrong school. He had the visitor's pass his middle school gave him as proof. Teacher kept the middle school visitor's pass as proof of that lateness story. I was the student. My boyfriend, now husband, and his dad had a collection of classic cars. Mustangs, Comets, Falcons. We drove a different one pretty much every day. They were in various stages of rebuild and had some kinks to work out. I came in half an hour late, covered in grease and sweat, and had to explain. The car caught on fire. Don't ask me how, you can talk to him, because he was completely unfazed as flames shot out of the top of the freaking motor. We pushed it from the red light. About that time another student came in. Fig. What classes? Boyfriend. In. His car is on fire in the parking lot. I work in South Korea and had a 5th grader say he was late because he caught a whale, which is a local euphemism for getting circumcised. Not sure if this applies, but a teacher was telling us about how important it was to hand in our essays until the end of the week. We had to hand 2 essays per week. While she was talking about how she wouldn't accept tardiness, there was this only one exception, when she accepted it on the following week. Turns out a student was mugged on his way to school. He ended up losing his backpack with everything inside, including the essays, phone, wallet, socks, and shoes. The student ended up going to talk to the teacher barefoot and crying, telling her how he tried even to persuade the assailant to let him get the essays out of his backpack, but to no avail. In high school, 2 girls asked to go to the bathroom at the beginning of drama class, which is a 45-minute class. The teacher let them go. They came back with 5 minutes left in class, holding McDonald's bags. The teacher cocked an eyebrow and asked what took them so long. One girl sighed and said there was just a really long line for the bathroom call-ins, but still. Forgot to turn off my effing heater. Somebody stole my tires and put my truck on blocks and gotta find my damn dentures. Those things are expensive are my favorites. Edit. The second guy didn't even have a truck. Obligatory not a teacher, but I had a friend who was late to first period Spanish class every day of senior year. One day, the teacher had enough and told him he was going to be marked as absent if he was late again. Lo and behold, he's abnormally late the next day, but almost kicks down the door with how excited he is about his excuse. He was rear-ended just outside of the school by the math teacher, who only hid my friend's car because he himself was rear-ended by another student at the same school. And if that situation wasn't enough, while the 3 drivers were exchanging info, someone waltzed up to the cars, hopped in the backmost one, and took off with it down the street. Needless to say, my friend wasn't marked absent that day. My school starts as early as 7:30 for some students. By public transit, 70% of my school qualifies for free/reduced lunch. It can be upwards of 2 hours to get to school. Those students have pretty legitimate reasons for lateness. I had one student a few years ago come late because his father had been murdered a few days earlier. I didn't expect him to show up at all, but his mom wanted him to go back to school. He just didn't get there on time. I had another late because her family had been evicted. Her parents had to work, so she was figuring out where to store their stuff. Not a teacher, but my senior year of high school. I drove home on my lunch period because I left my homework on my desk as home. Halfway home, the elderly man in front of me veered off the road and drove into a telephone pole. I stopped to make sure he was okay and for police to show up. He wanted me to help push his car off to the side of the road, but couldn't understand that his axle was snapped in 2 and buried about 4 inches into the pavement. I overheard the conversation with the police, and he was definitely on some medication and should not have been driving. My teacher was cool about it and actually let me grab lunch from the cafeteria and eat in class too, since I was going to grab lunch on the way back, but couldn't. Years ago I had a student come in who had missed the test the previous week. He said a while back he had been shot in the head and they were unable to remove the bullet, and the previous week it had started shifting and he was in the hospital. Showed me the scans of his head and everything. Also, right now another student's friend let me know that he is in jail for a few weeks and asked me if I could please not drop him as he wants to stay in the class. I had a small regular close-knit study group for my Latin classes. One of the members stopped showing up. To study group, to class, to tests, to anything. Nobody could get a hold of her for about 2 weeks. One day she shows up to class a bit flustered, just after we'd finished a major exam, and everybody's wondering if this professor is just going to fucking destroy her. Nope. He says, "Hey, where have you been? We've been so worried about you. Are you okay?" She's so worried about not having done homework or weekly exams or this midterm, and he doesn't give a F. He just wants to know if she's fine, and is trying to figure out where she disappeared to. Everybody else has left, and it's just her, the professor, and a handful of the study group members. She blushes and explains that about 2 weeks ago she started dating a new guy and she'd been, unable to get much rest at all in that period. The professor claps his hands together and says that's wonderful, and starts laughing happily, and the study group starts dying of laughter and she goes bright red. He simply told her that she could make up any of the work when she was ready, but don't feel rushed. So that was that. She was 2 weeks late because she'd been fucking. Side note, the professor was an amazing guy. One of the few American educators I've met who was truly focused on students as people and their learning, less so than grades or their authority. It's worth noting that many decades back as a young man he was training to become a priest. Well, he went into town and met this wonderful girl, so beautiful, so funny, and he discovered with her that he really liked X. And well, you can't be a priest and bang, so he peaced out, married her and banged forever and ever. Cool guy.